Today we celebrate the feast of the baptism of the Lord, and our first reading comes from the prophet Isaiah. It's the first of 4 servant songs that prophet gives us, that tell the story of the suffering servant, this Messiah figure. Now, throughout Jewish history, there was debate as to who this suffering servant was. Some thought it was a figure from the past, like Moses. Others, a great king or prophet in the future. And still others thought the suffering servant represented Israel as a whole. We read it at the feast of the baptism of the Lord because at Jesus' baptism, it became apparent just who he was. And it became apparent that Jesus was the prophesied figure from Isaiah, that Jesus was the suffering servant. Now, you read in this passage and in all of Isaiah's servant songs just exactly how this figure is described. As one who will not cry out, as one who will not break a bruised reed, as one who will bring about redemption not through political revolution or violence or force, but through suffering, through service. A lot of great saints have commented on this passage throughout the years. Saint Benedict, the great founder of monasticism, of monastic life, monasteries, uses the suffering servant as an example for what a leader in a religious community should be. That they should recognize that all of us in the world are already bruised, and so we should lead with gentleness. We should seek to be loved rather than feared. St. Irenaeus connects this to another passage referencing Elijah, when he says, after the fire, after the earthquake, after the mighty wind, the Spirit appears in the gentle silence. That is how God works. The image of the suffering servant, we should notice, stands in stark contrast to what we've seen too often in our world today. Stands in stark contrast to images of political violence from this past week. The suffering servant that we read about at the baptism of the Lord should remind us just how we're called to lead. Just how it is God seeks to bring redemption and salvation to his people. All of us, as we seek to bring about and to live God's kingdom in the here and now, should take our lead from none other than Christ, the suffering servant, and recognize that it's through our service, through our willingness to sacrifice, through a gentle obedience to the will and the action of our God, that we will bring about his kingdom, that we will fulfill the promise that we learned long ago from the prophet Isaiah, and that is brought to fulfillment in Jesus Christ.